Hello everybody. So in this video, I want to show a patch from my jam that I posted last night. That's jam number 9. I'm going to go through what the patch looks like and what my thinking was behind it. I post all of these patches on my Patreon page. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, check it out. A lot of those patches have Patreon exclusive videos, which I hate making things exclusive, but I also want to create something to give back to the people who want to support my channel. So if it's something you're interested in and you've been getting use out of these videos, please consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. And hopefully these types of patches and videos will make it worth your while. So this is going to be a pretty relaxed video. I didn't make an outline like I usually do for my videos. I made that jam last night. I woke up early this morning. I've got a cup of coffee, and I figured I'd sit down and just kind of explain what was going on. So before I even started, there was a couple of things I wanted to do. What I'm trying to do with these patches is show off things that I've made videos about. So even just right from the get-go, what I wanted to do was, number one, I wanted to have the Mother playing at something other than 16th notes, because I just did a video on changing the sequencer times. I also wanted to make sure that I was using 12-step equal temperament on the sub, and as a result, I wanted to play in a different key other than C. And the last thing that I was setting out to do that I haven't done a video on, but I'm thinking about doing with the Mother was creating drum sounds out of the Mother. So I'm actually using the DFAM just for bass. I mean, it has some percussive elements, but it's mostly holding on the bass. The Mother's playing a kick drum, and then the sub's doing its Subharmonicon thing. Now, just right off the bat, I want to say I started out with saying, oh, I'm going to play in a different key. And I ended up in E minor, which isn't that far off from C. And I'll do another patch at some point that's in a wildly different key than C. But either way, it is not in C major. It is in E minor. So let's dig through the patch. Also, I should note that I like to give these patches names and things like that. And I had a hard time coming up with a name for this one. So if you think of something or there's a name that sticks out to you that you think it should be named, let me know in the comments section. I'd really appreciate some input on that. Right now, what I'm going with is sci-fi soundtrack, but I don't know that that's really interesting or necessarily fits. If you think of something better, let me know. So as far as the actual patchwork, there's not a whole lot going on with the Mother and the sub. There's a few patches going on in the DFAM, and let's walk through those. So I have the filter envelope modulating the FM amount, the triangle LFO of the Mother going into the VCF mod. So this we can use to attenuate how much our cutoff is being affected by the LFO of the Mother. I've also got pitch going into VCO decay, which, there's not that much variation in the pitches, but it does affect it a little bit. The other patches that you see here are just the sine output is going into the advanced clock of the DFAM. It is set to go in its default settings, so at 4 pulses per quarter note. So it's going at 16th notes. So that's the DFAM. The notes that I assigned, I actually did something that I don't normally do, and I used a tuner. I have a Mordax data. It's off the screen, but that's what this patch cable is. And what I did was I plugged it into the VCA, opened up the cutoff, and actually programmed in each individual note. And so I also put on the patch, as you can see, something that I don't normally do. Usually I just write where the setting is. But in this case, I actually went through and wrote out the notes that I programmed in. So it kind of stays with an E minor. And if we listen to it, let me unplug this. This is what it sounds like all by itself. So you can really hear that kind of swing. The LFO of the Mother's at a pretty low setting, and this is barely attenuated if I turn that up. I just wanted that to kind of stay steady. And it's just a cool E minor bass line. And so during the performance, there are some things that I adjust, and that's the cutoff, resonance a little bit. That sounds cool. Turning up the envelope on the filter gives it that kind of funk vibe. And then as it builds up, to get it to be more percussive, if I brought in these two envelopes. So that is the DFAM. So what's going on in the Mother is I have a very, very simple sequence. It's just one note, and it's a very, very, very low E, because we're sticking in E with E minor. And I've programmed this just to be a kick drum. This is what it sounds like. So in how I'm doing this, there's actually no patching going on. It's all just the settings on the front. But I'm using kind of the same concepts that the DFAM uses, where we have a VCO and an envelope that affects the pitch of the VCO. So that's what I've done here is I've set the VCO mod to envelope. I've turned it all the way up, and I've set the VCO mod destination for frequency. And in this VCO mod destination, I think when you're turning it to frequency, it creates some really funky tones if you're just kind of using it with like a regular sequence and a synth sound, but it works really well for percussive elements like this because it basically does the same exact thing that the DFAM's doing. So I'm using a pulse wave, and I just dialed in settings that, you know, are going to be listed on the patch just to make it kind of a percussive sound. It's also the VCF mod amount is at envelope, cutoff is fairly low. If you turn up the VCF mod amount, it sounds a little bit more of aggressive punch. If you turn down the VCO mod amount, it kind of sounds a little bit dead. The mix brings in some noise, and you can adjust that to give like the feeling of sort of the mallet hitting the head of the drum. I just wanted a moderate amount. So that's it. And then I wanted it kind of punching on the quarter notes. So what I did was I had done the video explaining that you could change the sequencer settings. So I held down shift or keyboard and step, both arrows, and adjust the tempo so that it goes on number 4. And that creates that kick on the quarter notes. And that's what it sounds like. So let's listen to the Mother and the DFAM together. Now I should also note that this is kind of like a buggy thing that I've noticed, and I'm not sure if it's just my units or if it's just a bug within the firmware or something. I'm thinking about reaching out to Moog. I've noticed that when I change the sequencer settings, there's kind of like a little stutter in the voltage that comes from the assign. And it doesn't always happen, but it does happen enough to be annoying. And I noticed a few times when I was making the video that I would set it up right, just like this, where it's on the last step. I would reset it and everything. And then when I would hit it, sometimes it just wouldn't lock up right, or the DFAM would kind of stutter a little bit, start slower, and I'd have to kind of reset it and restart it. I haven't noticed that bug happening when the Mother is set to 16th notes, but I do notice it happen when I change the value on the sequencer. And it doesn't happen consistently, so I don't think it's user error, but I don't know. Let's see if it does it this time. Yeah, see, it did it. Notice that the kick is playing on step 2 and step 6. But if I just set it up all again, it might work out, it might not. Still playing on the step 2 and 6. Let's try just wiggling this a little bit. Sometimes wiggling the tempo knob does it. And there, it's fine. And that's an example of, see, it's hitting on the 1 and the 5 now. That's an example of, I set it up the same exact way. I put it on the last step. I hit reset. I did everything. Just simply wiggling that tempo knob sort of reset everything. But anyways, that's the kick sound played against the bass. And, you know, on the jam video, I had this slathered in effects. This is a totally clean sound. There's no effects going through it at all. But yeah, that's some interesting behavior. I don't know if anybody has any insight on why that's happening. Let me know. I do think that just sort of moving the tempo knob around seems to resolve it, but it might be just coincidence too. But it's definitely something that in a studio situation doesn't really matter that much, because typically if I start it and it's wrong, I just sort of stop everything, reset it, and, you know, 1 or 2 times I can get it to work correctly. But in a live situation, I could see it being kind of problematic. Anyway, let's move on to the sub. So the sub has some interesting things going on. There isn't much in the way of patching. I have, I'm using the trigger out of the DFAM into the Subharmonicon. And how I notate my patches for the sub is I actually indicate all the notes that I'm playing and the subdivisions. So this is set to E. This is set to E an octave lower. I have the second subdivision, the fourth subdivision, the eighth subdivision, and the fourth subdivision. So this first oscillator is playing higher notes, but it's all playing in octaves. The second oscillator is holding down the way, you know, the sub 1 is like sub bass, but this is kind of like the more bassy tones. Let me talk about what's going on in the sequencer, and then I'll talk about the rest of the setting. So in the sequencer, I have how I notate this is with the changes that it makes to the oscillator. So the first one is 0. It doesn't change it at all. Then it goes -2, which would be the 7th or D. Then it goes -9, which is actually goes all the way down to the 5th, I believe. Let me just confirm that. And I use my tuner for all of these too. So I've plugged my Mordax tuner into the VCA. I turn down all of my sub, all of my oscillators, and then I just set it to the one that I want, and I press trigger. So that would be a D, that's a G, and that's a B. So that's kind of like a E minor 7, because you got the D in there, and the rest are just chord tones. So if we play that, has that nice kind of ring out. So that's what's happening with VCO 1. And let me reset this. I'll turn all these down. With VCO 2, you have this major sub bass. That's what they sound like all together. But how this is tuned is the first one's E. G, so that's a chord tone. This one's not a chord tone. It's a C, but the C really leads nicely into the B. So it's kind of a nice chord progression. Now the rhythms I have for these are set up so that sequencer 1 is playing in time with the DFAM, so it's playing 16th notes. The sequencer 2 is set to a subdivision of 8. So that means it'll change every 2 times through the sequencer, the bass line. So the bass line will pass through twice, and then it'll change to the next step in the sequencer. When we hear them together, let me turn all these up. So another thing that as I do while I'm performing this, especially at the beginning, is I turn sequencer 1 off and on. And so it sounds great when you have it on step 1 and sequencer 1 is off. And actually you can get some really interesting things if you set it to step 2 and then turn the sequencer off. That's step 3. Step 4. So that, I mean, that's pretty cool in and of itself, but if we turn it on, so if you look on my settings, I didn't indicate any volume because those were things I largely just improvised. I would turn down VCO 1 if I didn't want it to ring out. And if you leave sequencer on, it still sounds out in like 16th note punches. But if you want it to be steady chords, you can just turn this on, turn the K up. And slowly bringing this in as you want it to. So that was largely improvised. At the beginning of the jam, you have these kind of swells. And that's because what I did was I turned down the EG amount into the negative value and then opened up the cutoff. And I also increased the attack just a little bit. And what that creates are these nice swells. I think I also had sequencer 1 off. So that's how I created the swells at the beginning. Then I turned down the volume because I wanted to go into positive range for the envelope. And I did that and turned up this as a kind of way to transition in. And I reset everything. Then there's something interesting that happened that when I was actually performing it, I kind of thought it was a mess up. But then after listening back this morning, I was like, oh man, I should have really laid into that. I'm going to play a quick clip. And it's these dubstep wobbles kind of thing. What I was going for was I wanted to have everything all set up so that when I faded back in the sub, it would have sounded like this. But I had forgotten that my attack was slightly lower, and as I was stumbling around trying to fix that, I made those cool wobbles. And in the moment, I didn't recognize how cool they were, but after listening back, I was like, oh, I wish I had done more of those. So I think... I'm gonna have to practice it a little bit, but it's basically going from having the attack and decay kind of like slightly off and then moving them together and just playing around with those settings, but I'm not moving them very much. Anyways, you can just play around with it. It's one of those examples of why we should always record our stuff, because sometimes we'll have some happy accidents. Another thing that I had practiced but it didn't actually put into the jam that I wish I had done is I played around with turning the sequencer 1 on and off. And sort of improvising with that. And then another patch idea that I didn't actually use, but that I had used when I was jamming out, was taking the LFO square wave out and putting that into rhythm 1, because that will create that sort of same effect, but it'll be automated. So that's just another patching idea, but that's not included in the actual jam. So when we put it all together, I'm going to hook this back up, put it in the clock, reset, put this on step 8. I'm going to just move my tempo up knob up and down a whole bunch of times to see if we can get it right. And let's hear what it sounds like all together with no effects. See, it did it again. Changed it. Started. There was a stutter step on the DFAM. So that's it. That's my patch. I hope you like this video. Again, if you like these types of videos and patches, check out my Patreon page. I appreciate it so much to the people who are supporting my page. It's really a big help, and I love the community and answering questions and stuff like that. So definitely check it out. But let me know what you think in the comments section, especially if you have a good idea for a name for this patch. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.